That's a really interesting idea to consider. Ultimately, I don't think they'll go in that direction because I think that takes the brand down a notch. And I don't think Amazon wants to have the physical embodiment of their brand be this treasure hunt sort of experience.
Hey gang, it's Wednesday, September 8th. Andrew and listeners, welcome to the Behind the Numbers Daily, an e-marketer podcast made possible by VTEX. I'm Marcus, and today I'm joined by one of our principal analysts covering retail and e-commerce. It's Andrew Lipsman.
Hey Marcus, good to be with you.
Hey there, chap. He's back, ladies and gentlemen. He is back. Today's fact, Shaquille O'Neal only hit one three-pointer his entire career. Over the 19-year career that Shaq had, he scored 28,596 points. That means there are only 7 people in NBA history who scored more points than Shaq. What's nearly as insane is that of all those points he scored, Shaq hit a three-point shot exactly one time, February 16th, 1996, in a 121-91 game between the Magic and the Bucks. Also, Andrew, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, the chap who scored the most points ever in NBA history, played half his pro career with no three-point line and half of his career with it. He also scored just 1 3 on 18 attempts in his career. That's 6% from behind the arc. That's bad, but still better than Shaq's 5%.
I thought Kareem could actually shoot a little bit. Shaq, I'm guessing, I'd love to see video of that. I'm sure it was a buzzer beater that he threw up.
Flagged it up. It was 100%.
To actually shoot a three.
100%. Yeah, he flags it up right at the end. Yep. Other big men ahead of Shaq on the scoring list are Karl Malone, second all-time scoring. He hit 85 threes during his career. And Wilt Chamberlain, he played before the three-point line was introduced into the NBA in 1979-1980 season. Anyway, today we're discussing why Amazon has decided to have a department store. The death of the department store, very few are likely to survive. Shuttered flagships, empty malls, cancelled orders, risks of bankruptcy, the coronavirus has hit the behemoths of the retail world. This was an April 2021 New York Times headline updated in July, written by Sapna Maheshwari and Vanessa Friedman. We'll see about that, said Amazon, who the Wall Street Journal just reported are planning to open department store-like retail locations, the first of which could pop up in California or Ohio. A recent Wall Street Journal piece noted that a generation ago, department stores accounted for 10% of retail sales, excluding automobiles, gas, and restaurants, according to estimates by consulting firm Customer Growth Partners. 10% what they used to account for department stores of retail sales. So far this year, they have accounted for less than 1%. So, Andrew, a lot of people scratching their heads on this one. Why is Amazon diving headfirst into what everyone thought was a rather doomed department store?
Yeah, well, I think many folks are probably looking at recent headlines of Amazon surpassing Walmart in total retail sales and thinking, why do you even need to go into brick and mortar? Right. Yeah. Amazon has a bit of a brick and mortar footprint today. Most of that is Whole Foods locations. They've got some Amazon 4-star stores, Amazon Go, and a few Amazon Fresh grocery stores, but it's not a ton of locations overall. So why go into brick and mortar if you're dominating everybody through e-commerce alone? And I think the reality is, as we look at the winds of competition for Amazon, that increasingly it's being fought along omni-channel dimensions. And so if Amazon's really not much of an omni-channel player today, Walmart is, Target is, Home Depot is. So whoever Amazon is competing with across these different categories, I think that they're realizing that they need to have click and collect capabilities. That's where a lot of e-commerce growth is coming from with these other players. And also increasingly, it's about understanding consumers' behavior across channels. It opens you up, obviously, to a lot more retail sales, given that the vast majority of retail sales still are offline. But increasingly, I like to think of Amazon's offline footprint as a way to grab data on consumers that will fuel their fast emerging advertising business. So I think that's something that should be looked at with a lot of what Amazon's doing at brick and mortar is advertising.
Yeah, designed the right way, stores could give Amazon even more customer data. Absolutely. You mentioned, this just allows them to compete more directly with some of those larger rivals, Walmart, Target, who do have more of an omni-channel presence. And we've seen the rise of click and collect. You mentioned some of their stores. I think that's interesting, the Amazon-owned stores. So allegedly, they approached some US apparel brands around 2 years ago with the idea of opening large-scale stores that would showcase their products. But Supermarket News notes Amazon's US physical stores and how many of them they have. It's not a tiny amount when you think about it. So 26 Amazon Go locations, 502 Whole Foods markets, obviously the largest share here, 8 Amazon Fresh grocery stores, 2 Amazon Go grocery stores, 24 Amazon bookstores, 29 Amazon 4-star outlets, and 7 presented by Amazon pop-up locations. Add all of those up, and you've got something which isn't a size of a Walmart. They have close to 5,000 US stores. Sam's Club, owned by them, has 500. Target, 2,000. Kohl's, 1,100. Amazon has half as many as Kohl's, though. But they've got close to 600 stores when you count all of those ones up that I just mentioned. And also, Andrew, there are a range of different types of physical stores. You've got higher end grocery, mass market grocery, cashierless checkout, pop-up shops, bookstores. So they've had a lot of opportunity to experiment with different flavors of brick and mortar.
I'm going to provide a counter argument here, and I'll say 600 stores sounds like a lot. 500 of them, though, are Whole Foods. And Whole Foods existed before Amazon acquired it. So to some extent, Amazon can retrofit Whole Foods into the model of brick and mortar retail that they want to have going forward. But really, it's about this Amazon branded store footprint, and that's about 100 stores. So I would say all of those are really still in the experimental phase. They're going to become really important, and as I mentioned, I think they are going to be aligned with a lot of what makes Amazon: frictionless commerce, speed, ease of use, lower prices. You wouldn't accuse Whole Foods of having lowered prices, although they have lowered them since Amazon's
too cheap
acquired them. But what's interesting for me to think about with this department store concept is, why go into department stores, right? Everyone would say, well, the department stores are dying. This whole model of retail, it seems like something of yesteryear. Why is Amazon going into that? And I'll say this. We don't know exactly what it's going to look like. And there's a lot of speculation around what the model could be, right? So you could say the traditional department store model, like a Macy's. Do I think it will be something like that? No, I don't. Another model, which has had some success, is something that would be more akin to a Target. Could I see Amazon pursuing something that is more akin to Target? I would say yes, that seems likely. I've also heard about the possibility that we kind of know that a big reason for Amazon having these stores is as a returns hub. They've partnered with Kohl's for returns. And so they've kind of gotten some eyes into that department store model. Could it be something like that? And then when you get those returns, do you put them back out onto the floor and, create this flea market and chance for a real treasure hunt retail experience? That's a really interesting idea to consider. Ultimately, I don't think they'll go in that direction because I think that takes the brand down a notch. And I don't think Amazon wants to have the physical embodiment of their brand be this treasure hunt sort of experience.
Right.
But I do think there will be some way that they'll kind of plug returns into the model, or it just becomes another, distributions hub for what is ultimately a massive logistics company.
Yeah, it gives them a place to process returns, which a huge portion of purchases end up being. Between 25 to 30% of online purchases are returned in an average year, notes Navar. Every return costing a retailer on average $10 to $20 per return. In 2020, when people were buying more things online than ever before, returns shot up 70%. So returns definitely front of mind for a lot of people. Amazon, no less so than the others. You mentioned some of those brick and mortar retailer names and also department store names. It's not been bad for every department store, Andrew, right? Last year, COVID-19 pandemic crushed JCPenney, Neiman Marcus Group, and Lord & Taylor, all filing for bankruptcy. But Macy's and Kohl's just reported strong sales, was noting Sebastian Herrera, Esther Fung, and Susan Kapner of the Wall Street Journal. So it's not all bad for all department stores. You
could argue that's something of a dead cat bounce. Department stores, foot traffic, they were non-essential retailers and they're heavily driven by apparel, right? All of those things meant that they were going to be the hardest hit in 2020. Now, as consumers are returning to more normal shopping habits, they're getting a boost, right? So they have very favorable comps going into last year. I would also argue part of what has eroded the need for department stores is Amazon. What Amazon has done is kind of unbundled the shopping experience where you go to Amazon for one-off purchases in a frictionless way. The big reason to go to department stores was for the stock up purchase, right? You had big occasions where you went and you needed multiple items. And so its reason for existence has just kind of been chipped away at for a while. So ultimately, I think that use case right now is probably more pronounced than it's been. People are going back to work, back to school, back to entertaining and events. All of these are the occasions that drive that reason for going into a department store. So I think this is going to be a very strong year for department stores, but I don't think we've seen a fundamental shift in this kind of long-term downward trend.
Yeah. I mean, one of the benefits here for Amazon is that property prices are cheap. There are a lot of spaces which have been hollowed out because other companies weren't able to stick around through the pandemic. And Andrew, you mentioned that we're probably going to see something different. There's reporting that the square footage of Amazon stores will only be a third the size of the average department store, so 30,000 square feet, as opposed to the traditional $100,000 square foot space that we're used to. So we could see some uniqueness in that regard.
Yeah, I think, the new era of retail is going to be a lot more about showrooming and experiences rather than containing a lot of inventory. The square footage has in the past been meant for housing inventory. Amazon's probably going to stick to the fast moving and star products, give consumers a chance to, touch and feel Amazon consumer electronics, things of that nature, but they're not going to feel a need to carry inventory for everything. So I think the slimmer square footage makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Susie, David Canyon, one of our principal analysts on the retail team as well, was saying, as for the small square footage of these stores, almost all big box retailers are doing smaller store formats. It's easier to start small and then go big versus scaling back like Target, Macy's, Bloomingdale's, folks like that. Interesting number on department stores and how much they account for in terms of mall square footage. Department store chains accounting for 30% of total mall square footage in the US. 10% of that just comes from Sears and JCPenney, according to Green Street Advisors from January. Andrew, in terms of what we're going to see sold in these stores, Wall Street Journal reporting says it's unclear what brands Amazon will offer in these stores, but the company's private label goods are expected to feature prominently. Any thoughts on what you expect to see sold inside of these stores? Consumer electronics,
apparel. I think it really starts with those two categories, which are the biggest categories. Household appliances, you can consider that part of the electronics offering. Housewares, things of that nature. I'm very curious to see if there will be any sort of grocery items. My guess is not. I think they'll probably keep the Amazon Fresh and Amazon Go concepts separate from this. So that takes up obviously a lot of square footage in a Target or a Walmart. But I think it's going to be some of those more traditional categories. I think apparel is a category they still want to make a bigger dent in. So this may be a way for them to do that.
According to Wells Fargo, Amazon is now the largest seller of clothing in the US, surpassing Walmart. Andrew, you mentioned that Amazon had surpassed Walmart in terms of the dollars, in terms of being the biggest retailer for all categories, but they're also overtaking them in terms of clothing, according to Wells Fargo. Are consumers going to be open to it? There was a hot off the press, according to a Civic Science survey from August of 2021, so a matter of weeks ago, 50% of American adults said they would be interested in shopping at an Amazon physical retail store if one opened near them. 13% had said very interested. And Andrew, it seemed to suggest that young people are even more open to it. It may seem a bit odd for us, thinking about department stores and why would anyone want to shop there. But if you think about the consumer and the brand of Amazon, that could carry some weight, especially with younger people who haven't formed their brick and mortar opinions or habits in terms of where they shop yet.
Yeah, well, so younger consumers have always had an interesting affinity for the Amazon brand, and I'm sure that they'll exhibit a curiosity. The bigger question is whether they'll like the experience. And I think Amazon has already found out that it's a different ballgame in brick and mortar, and merchandising really matters. A lot of retail folks who have gone into the Amazon 4-star experience said that it's kind of a crapshoot and it's kind of lacking. They're not really sure how to merchandise particularly well. And, I'll be pretty forgiving on that. It's going to be a learning experience. You don't just get into brick and mortar overnight and have this all sorted out. So I think that's also probably worth noting here with the department store is whatever the early incarnations of it are, it's going to take them a while to figure out the right model, how to merchandise effectively, and how to use it to drive sales. And as we've seen with some of these stores like Amazon Go, I mean, we were hearing a few years ago that they were just going to start scaling this into hundreds and thousands of locations, and they clearly haven't done that. Amazon tends to slow roll things and really tweak the model and tune the dials till they get it right. Then they put their foot on the gas. So we need to take a little bit of a longer term view of how long it will take to even open these locations and then to start scaling them. Although I would say there's maybe a bit more urgency now, given the advantage that Walmart and Target and others have with brick and mortar. I feel like Amazon's going to want to get going with this pretty quickly.
Yeah, another reason to want to get going with this pretty quickly, especially if they use their cashierless technology, their Amazon Go technology, is that the Delta variant has been worrying a lot of folks as of late. And insider intelligence analyst Jeremy Goldman was noting that Amazon's grab and go contactless checkout process, which has trialed for years in Amazon Go, could give it an advantage among consumers with lingering COVID-19 concerns.
Yeah, especially if this is the new normal where consumers are always, even as the pandemic recedes, if we're a bit more wary about just being in public spaces and getting in and out more quickly, that certainly will advantage Amazon.
So we've got time for the first half. Time now for the halftime report, where we summarize the key takeaways in a handful of seconds. Andrew, what are your takeaways from the first half?
My key takeaway is everything that Amazon's doing in terms of brick and mortar retail is very interesting experimentation, but I would advise all listeners, don't think about it through the retail lens. It will drive retail sales. Think about it through the advertising lens. Increasingly, Amazon's business going forward is an AWS and advertising based business. That's what's generating the profits, and this ad business is really scaling. Think about how retail fuels that ad business.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of ad business, we just were sharing a link to Amazon reportedly planning on releasing an Amazon branded TV as soon as October. So Andrew, yeah, everything that you were telling me on an episode not too long ago seems to be coming true in terms of Amazon turning on all these taps at once and creating one heck of what promises to be exceptional advertising experience.
We need to do a whole separate episode just about the Amazon TV. I'm glad you brought it up. It's an advertising play.
Absolutely.
I'll just say that. And I would also try and work in a little plug here, because this week we have a massive Amazon report coming out.
Oh, terrific. Power
of Amazon, where we're looking at a really far-reaching analysis of Amazon across a number of different dimensions and aspects of their business. So we'll just do a shameless plug for that report.
God, it's good timing. I didn't even know that was happening. Check out that on Pro. If you're a Pro subscriber, emarketer.com, check that out. And we'll also do a follow-up to that episode that me and Andrew did, where he was talking all about how Amazon is getting into advertising and how they're going to be able to take over it, or have the potential to really take over it really, really quickly. We'll do a follow-up to that and check out some of those new developments. All right, so we've got time for the lead story. It's time now for In Other News. But first, a quick word from our sponsor, VTEX. Everyone is talking about digital transformation, but what does it mean in real life? Digital Insider is a new podcast series about the digitalization of retail, where business leaders, academics, and thinkers discuss how businesses are transforming and give their perspectives, practical advice, thought process, and lessons learned. Go to digitalinsider.com to learn more, or listen to it on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. All right, folks, we are back. It's time now for In Other News. Is the online shopping boom over? And Albers and Warby Parker prepare to IPO. Story 1. The Q2 retail earnings are in. Some of the highlights. Walmart reported revenue of $141 billion, up 2.4% year on year. They said US store visits had gotten better despite the Delta variant as online sales decelerated. Target's comparable sales were up 9% year on year, also noting that combined traffic to Target stores and websites grew 13% in Q2. Home Depot's Q2 comparable sales grew less than 5% after 4 consecutive quarters of over 20% growth, notes Matt Grossman of the Wall Street Journal. Andrew, you had mentioned to me that one of the central questions here is the online shopping boom over? Is it?
In a word, no. So first off, all of these big box retailers continue to post really strong numbers, but we saw the tide shift back in the direction of brick and mortar in a pretty significant way in a lot of these cases. If you recall last year, many of them were seeing year-over-year growth in their e-commerce business in triple digits or high double digits, 80, 90, 100% growth. So we saw those numbers come back down to earth because, well, they kind of had to. I think that there was a lot of misconception around the fact that this boom in e-commerce that we had in the early part of the pandemic was creating a new normal, as if things would just continue to grow off of this newly incredibly elevated base. It's hard to do that. It's really hard to post growth on top of that already dramatic growth. So to some extent, it had to come back down to earth. And in the early days of the pandemic, when I was talking with our forecasting team, we said we need to prepare for the fact that we may see negative growth in some of these retailers in their e-commerce business come next year, just because they can't sustain these levels. And in fact, a retailer who's been doing great, like Best Buy, was down over 20% in their e-commerce business in the most recent quarter. That's going to happen. Yeah. The question is really, where are you versus 2 years ago? And they are well ahead of the curve. So e-commerce has permanently been elevated, but it's just unrealistic to expect crazy growth numbers. So we're seeing a lot of them go into, single digits and in some cases negative for the time being.
They've come back down to earth, but there's still, a few things which are different about these companies. Two points here. So one for Target, Brian Wassel of Retail Touchpoints was noting that, quote, the secret to Target's success is the retailer's expertise at utilizing its stores for fulfillment, whether as a staging ground for last mile delivery or an efficient curbside pickup hub. He was saying over 95% of Target's Q2 sales were fulfilled from stores, close quote. So something for Target and how they're going to be different going forward. And then for Home Depot, their comparable sales for big ticket transactions, those over $1,000, grew 24% in Q2. So basket sizes are up at Home Depot. So that could be something that lasts as well.
That's also something that I would say, look at the comps to last year. If you think back to Q2 when people were scared, they were going to essential goods, but what they were not doing is upgrading, major appliances. They were going to push back that purchase. So that's a favorable comparison that they have this year as people feel more comfortable doing that.
Yeah, good point. Story 2, Albers and Warby Parker IPO, or are planning to. Let's start with Warby Parker, Andrew. D2C eyewear brand Warby Parker are also looking to IPO. The company was founded 10 years ago and are known for selling more affordable, fashion-forward prescription glasses, both online and in their 145 US stores. The company's net revenues nearly reached $400 million, but have seen widening losses in the past 3 years. Your thoughts on Warby Parker IPOing?
Yeah, I think once we got to look at the numbers, the top line is not overwhelmingly strong. On its way to 500 million in revenue this year. It's a nice number, but it's nothing dramatic given how prominent the brand has become. The profitability, I think that, a lot of young companies have not been profitable, especially as they move to IPO. They'll spend a lot on marketing and customer acquisition. I think there's a clear path to profitability and the business will be just fine. It's just not a rocket ship. And a lot of these consumer brands, the D2Cs, when we didn't have visibility, they were being treated like they were rocket ships. And the reality is they're maybe more traditional businesses with more traditional profit profiles. And, there's room for them in the market and they may build strong, powerful, durable brands, but they're not world beaters.
Insider Intelligence principal analyst Jeremy Goldman noting that contact lenses could be a natural area of growth since in their most recent fiscal year, 95% of their revenue came from glasses sales and just 2% from sales of contacts. Andrew, we mentioned Allbirds as well. Sustainable shoe brand Allbirds is filing for an IPO. Its eco-friendly footwear has become popular with tech people. The company currently has 27 stores across markets, including New York City, Shanghai, and Berlin. However, 9 out of 10 of the dollars they made last year came from digital channels. Allbirds booked a net loss for 2020 because of the pandemic, but revenue grew from 194 million to 219 million, which is about half the size of Warby Parker. Andrew, your thoughts on Allbirds?
Yeah, Albers is interesting because they've been much more digital D2C and they haven't really rolled out into brick and mortar yet. Whereas Warby, pre-pandemic, 2/3 of their revenue was already coming from physical locations. This is what D2C brands have to do to grow, to hit scale. They've got to extend their product line. So, Warby's been pretty exclusively eyewear. And as you mentioned, they can move into contacts, but where do they go from there as a brand? Albers has already extended their shoe line pretty significantly and now have to go into other types of apparel. And that's where my question marks come in, is how well will they do that? Their brand is known for comfort in shoes and they have a certain sort of look. Can they replicate some of those same dimensions to extend the brand into other areas? I don't know, but I don't see a lot in this business where I say, oh, this is a rocket ship too. I think it is a digital native that is evolving into a traditional brand.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind seeing coffee shops in Warby Parker stores. It's just me. If Warby can get that sorted out for me, I'd really appreciate it. Allbirds putting sustainability at the heart of their IPO, apparently promising to continually report on its land, chemical and energy use. So trying to be a little bit different there. 'Tis the season of IPOs, notes Melissa Repko of CNBC. Jessica Albers' Honest Company filed for an IPO. Medical scrubs maker Figs recently went public. And salad chain Sweetgreen filed confidentially for an IPO. That's all we've got time for. Thank you, Andrew, for hanging out.
Thanks, Marcus.
Thanks to Victoria, who edits the show. And thanks to everyone listening in. We'll see you guys tomorrow, hopefully, for the Behind the Numbers Daily, the eMarketer podcast made possible by VTEX.